Welcome everyone to CNAS for this discussion today. I'm Kate Kuzminski. I am a senior fellow and the program director here at CNAS of our Military Veterans and Society program, where we focus on military personnel policy. We are thrilled to be joined today by Secretary Christine Wormuth, the 25th Secretary of the Army. We are pleased that she's returned to CNAS. She spoke with our colleagues, Dr. Stacy Pettyjohn here at the Defense Program at CNAS back in February, so we're thrilled to have you back. So I'm going to open it up to you. When you spoke here last in February, you listed your 6 objectives for the Army, and a number of those touch on personnel issues. So if you'd like to just start talking through what some of those objectives were.
Sure. First of all, it's just great to be here and to see a lot of familiar and friendly faces. So I'm really happy to be back. And I've been Secretary of the Army now for about a year and a half, and have had a lot of opportunity to build on the appreciation that I already had before becoming Sec Army about all of the things that we ask our soldiers and families to do, and to really see, in a very direct and personal way, how important it is to ensure that we are taking care of our soldiers and families and giving them good quality of life. I laid out 6 priorities about back in January, and then came to CNAS to talk about it. And it is not a coincidence that 50% of those objectives were really focused on, people first. The 3 were that are directly related to people. As I said, I wanted the Army to focus on making sure that we have a positive command climate at scale. And very much related to that, the other objective is reducing harmful behaviors in the Army. And I would put sexual harassment, sexual assault, racism, preventing suicide, kind of in that bucket. And then the other priority was adapting our recruiting enterprise to really, taking a strategic look at how the Army does recruiting and making some changes. Because even back in January, when frankly, I think the scope of the challenge we were facing in recruiting wasn't quite as clear as it is now, certainly, it was still clear to me that we needed to change how we were recruiting. If we're going to be bringing in next generation talent, if we're going to be building the Army of 2030, we need to be recruiting for that Army in a way that was different from how we were doing it, in the 1990s, for example. So those were kind of the 3 of the 6 objectives that really focus on people.
So the Army has done quite a bit of work on talent management over the last couple of years, and you spoke to this a bit in your AUSA speech this year, and a number of our former colleagues here are from RAND. We worked on a lot of these issues in the past. Can you speak a bit to some of the programs that have come out of this talent management? So I'm thinking about the AIM 2.0 platform for assignments, the Battalion Command and Colonel's Command assessment programs, and what some of the outcomes are that you hope to see from those.
Sure. The AIM platform, is sort of commonly known as the talent marketplace. And what that really tries to do is give, I would say, both officers and NCOs more agency in their assignment process, but also give units more ability to sort of see who they might be bringing into the formation. So what that has enabled us to do really is to allow, again, focusing on officers just for the moment. First of all, they can express preferences as to where they would want to be located. This gives officers an opportunity to take spousal considerations in, looking at, particularly given some of the challenges our spouses face in terms of employment, being able to have a little bit more say in terms of geographically where they're located, I think is very popular. It allows officers to put forward resumes as opposed to just, sort of the typical Army platform or paperwork rather in terms of performance. And again, units who are trying to fill a particular position are actually allowed to interview officers who are interested. And what that's resulted in is really a higher percentage of our officers getting sort of one of their top 3 or top 5 assignments. And you see sort of a similar approach with our NCOs as well. So I think the marketplace, again, I think when I talk to people, one of the things they like the most is it just gives them a sense of a little bit more control over their own professional development and career path. On the Battalion Command Assessment Program, the Colonel Assessment Program, and we also have taken a similar approach in terms of an assessment program for our Sergeant Majors, for our chaplains, for our Acquisition Corps. This has really, I'm a huge fan of these assessment programs. They are not without some some challenges that we're still working through. This is a new kind of approach. I think we've done 3 or 4 cycles of BCAP now, but it really allows a much more holistic assessment of officers and their whether they are truly ready to lead. And so the process starts. You have sort of an order of merit list, a 1 to N rack and stack of the candidates. They come in with their normal OERs. But then they go through a very holistic assessment program. They do exercises, there's a writing test, there's a speaking test, they take a personality assessment with an operational psychologist, and then the process culminates with a double-blind panel, with a board of GOs essentially that also are a part of the assessment. And I think the best way to summarize at this point, why is this a good thing and kind of how is it working and how do we know that it's working, is the fact that for both BCAP and CCAP, what you see is about, if you compare the 1 to N list of the people coming in and how that list looks at the end of the process, there's about a 25 to 27% change in the order of people. So, so that tells me that this more holistic assessment is actually, there were people who under the old system, if you will, would have been found ready for command and would have been assigned, but actually now we're finding through the assessment program that maybe those people had some shortfalls and had some weaknesses that they needed to work on. And there were perhaps other candidates that under our traditional system weren't seen as ready, but when they go through the actual assessment, they are ready. So I think that's pretty important. The other thing, a couple other things I would highlight there is at the end of the process, everybody gets kind of an out brief with the operational psychologist. And if you're found, not yet ready for command, you get sort of a debrief on the things that you need to work on. And I think that's very important. And then people can choose whether they want to, if you will, kind of recompete a year later, and then, use that year to try to work on some of the things that they may have found as areas for improvement. So again, I think, we still have some tweaks to work on this. I've heard from some officers that they don't feel that the feedback they get at the end of the program is sufficiently clear and specific, for them to work on the weaknesses. So that's something I want to work on. But in general, I think it's a very good approach. One other thing I just wanted to flag for talent management is we have a new program now called Project Athena, which is really about trying to work with our more junior officers. And this is, again, kind of a program that allows our junior officers to do kind of an individual assessment of strengths and weaknesses. And then we can, give them resources to work on those areas that those assessments may show, that are, again, areas for improvement. So I think, we're trying to start that professional development and leadership development earlier than just, folks who are going into battalion command or brigade command.
It's more data and more inputs for the system to take a look at.
And this is where we're getting truly revolutionary. The GOs who were on the board for the assessment programs are now being assessed. They are now taking some of the assessments themselves before they sit on the board. And so that's new, I think, for some of our GOs. But again, I'm a big believer. I've been subject to 360 assessments myself, and I'm of the view, you're never too old or experienced to get better.
So I also think of the is shifting towards this prevention model, and what are some of the risks if we don't shift in that direction?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll start with the, why are we doing this, or sort of, what if we didn't do this? Why is this important? And fundamentally, I believe, given what we ask our soldiers and families to do, life in the Army is not easy. There are a ton of great opportunities in the Army, but it takes a special kind of person to serve in the Army, and it's a challenging lifestyle. So I think, we have got to take care of our soldiers. We've got to make sure that they have safe workplaces where there is, good morale. And if you want to have a safe workplace where the morale is high, you don't want to be worried about being sexually harassed. You want to feel like if you're struggling with whether it's a relationship issue or financial issues or substance abuse, that you can get support, that you can go to your chain of command and be treated respectfully with confidentiality and get the help that you need. And we have got to ensure that, I think, both to take care of the soldiers we have and to retain the soldiers and families that we have, but it's also critical to our ability to recruit, and we're in a very difficult recruiting environment right now. And I've spent a lot of time in the last several months meeting with recruiters all around the country, meeting with community leaders, school administrators, and one of the things I hear quite a bit is the importance of parents, on kids' decision-making about whether they're going to come into the Army. And the concerns a lot of times that the parents have revolve around these issues, revolve around, I'm worried that if my kid joins the Army, they're going to suffer psychological harm or they're going to be sexually harassed or something like that. So, we have got to put our money where our mouth is. Actions speak louder than words. We've got to show results in this area and not just talk about it. So that's why, I think it's so important. And we are doing a lot to try to get after this. And, I think we're trying to take a multi-dimensional approach to this. There's no single silver bullet. I think we have to have a combination of initiatives. And there isn't also, I think, a one-size-fits-all approach necessarily. So, different divisions, for example, around the country are taking different approaches, but everyone is emphasizing, focusing on how do we reduce harmful behaviors. So I think, I would say at the sort of ground level, if you will, we have things like the This Is My Squad initiative, where we're really trying to emphasize at the lowest levels, taking care of each other, looking out for each other. At the policy level, we have things like a new suicide prevention Army regulation that's going to be coming out shortly, and a whole suite of training associated with that. We are building a prevention workforce, and what I would emphasize here is we already have a lot of people in the Army who are doing what I would call, prevention work. We have the Family Advocacy Program, we have Health and Holistic Fitness, we have the Risk Resilient Councils. So what this additional increment of prevention people are going to do is really help us with sort of data and analytics. It's helping us be able to see ourselves more clearly and help commanders identify where there may be gaps and where we need potentially more resources. So it's not to say that we don't already have, frankly, a lot of civilians working on prevention-related issues, substance abuse programs, but it's, we haven't always been able to see all that data very holistically. And we've hired, our goal was to hire 80, I think, prevention workforce folks this year. We didn't quite make that. I think we're in the high 60s. Our plan is to hire an additional 200 next year. So we're kind of building this out over time. And so that's a lot of what we're doing in the prevention space. But I would say we're also doing things on the prevention side where, say, for example, the 11th Airborne in Alaska is doing 100% mental wellness checks, where everybody who comes to that division, gets seen by some sort of behavioral health resource. In some cases, it may be a military and family life counselor, not an actual, behavioral health practitioner. But, we are trying to make sure that we're screening everyone. And there are a couple of other divisions that are taking that approach as well. And then, of course, on the response side, we've done a lot. We have reshaped our SHARP training, made it much more scenario-based. We're trying not to PowerPoint everyone to death. We're doing a pilot of what we call fusion directorates, where in 6 different installations, and we're doing one in the reserves, where we basically try to put all of the resources for victims of sexual assault into one place. the victim advocates, the medical folks, the lawyers, all of that. I saw the Fusion Directorate at Fort Sill and was very impressed with it. That pilot ends next April, and we'll see about, how we're going to scale that up. And then, of course, the Army, along with the other services, has created a new Office of Special Trial Counsel to take these kinds of crimes out of the chain of command, to make sure that we have lawyers who are, who have real expertise in these areas. We have selected a one-star to lead that office. That office will report directly to me. We are, going to be adding some additional lawyers and paralegals and things to that office to make sure that it has the resources that it needs. And so I think, all of these things will help us. But it is, we cannot get complacent. We have to keep working on it. I am cautiously optimistic that our suicide numbers are down in 22 compared to where they were in 21. But, but to the complacency point, we just unfortunately had 4 suicides in Alaska, 3 at Fort Wainwright in the month of October, after not having any for several months. And so, we just have to keep working at it.
So you touched on the recruiting challenges. I think a lot of people in our audience are spending a lot of time thinking about the recruiting challenge. Can you first give us a sense of what the numbers look like at the end of last fiscal year and what some of the challenges were there?
Sure. We wound up recruiting about 45,000 soldiers last year, and our mission had been 60,000. So that's a pretty big shortfall. And that shortfall started becoming apparent, I would say, in the late winter, early spring. And, there are a variety of factors. I think it's important that people understand that some of the things that, some of the challenges we're facing in recruiting have been a long time coming and are not new developments. The whole issue with the childhood obesity problem, behavioral issues, all of the things that result in the fact that only 23% of young Americans are eligible to join the Army. Those are things that, this is not a new trend. This has kind of been slowly happening consistently over years. I do think, some of the unique things about the pandemic and the fact that kids were out of schools and that our recruiters were out of schools definitely contributed. And you see, lower test scores on the ASVAB as a result, although I will give a shout out to our DODEA schools who actually had better test scores than a lot of public schools, which is good. And then, of course, you have a really tight job market. So, Amazon, Target, Walmart are all offering $20 an hour and, more benefits, college tuition, things that used to be sort of our comparative advantage. So it's a mix of things. I think the thing that concerns me the most that does seem to be a little bit more of a recent development is the drop in propensity. Only 9% of young Americans are interested in serving in the military. And that's a very small percentage, and it's been a pretty rapid drop. And what that's really about, I think we're still trying to better understand. I think you do see a Generation Z, I think, and Americans generally, I think, have seen a loss of trust in institutions. While the military remains a very respected institution in our country, the percentages there have dropped a little bit as well. So I think we really have to focus on, so I would say it this way. When we've done a lot of research to try to understand what does Generation Z care about, and a couple of things really leap out. They want community, they want purpose, they want what they're doing to matter. And I think, when I think about the Army, we're nothing if not about community. We're this amazing team that does amazing things, and that gets to the purpose as well. I think we have a lot that should speak to a generation who wants to be part of a community, who purpose matters to them. So I think we really need to reintroduce the Army to the country, to young people, to their parents, to influencers. I just gave a speech down at Texas A&M that was really kind of about DARPA and technology, but I was saying, this is not your grandfather's Army anymore. We are a different Army, and it's not the Army of coin and counterterrorism anymore either. You know, I think we've got to talk about that and talk about how the Army of 2030 is different and all of the career opportunities that it offers to young Americans. But we've got a lot of work to do and have got to roll up our sleeves.
So to that end, about a month ago, I think it was pretty historic, you and the 2 other service secretaries issued an op-ed appealing to service not just to American youth, but also to their influencers and their communities. So can you speak a bit more to what the role of some of those influencers are, those parents, guidance counselors, teachers, school administrators, coaches?
They're really, really important. And I think, you know, again, there's a lot of research, particularly with Hispanic American communities and African American communities, where the parents, the moms, the grandmothers, you know, have a lot of say in what's going to happen. And so, again, I think, you know, we've got to be able to better explain what the Army offers, that we have 178 military occupational specialties, that kids can join the Army and do all sorts of things, not just infantry, not just be tankers, not just be, you know, helicopter pilots, but be data scientists and cyber warriors and doctors and lawyers and nurses and paralegals. But we've also got, you know, like I said, I think parents and high school guidance counselors really are focused on their perception that if you join the Army or the military, that you're going to have psychological harm. And I think the burden of proof is on us to communicate to parents and teachers and guidance counselors that, you know, that's not true. That's not the overwhelming experience that most of our soldiers have. I mean, look at our retention rates. You know, we are overperforming when it comes to retention, which I think says that most soldiers, you know, the experience they're having is a good experience. But certainly, you know, we absolutely do see sexual harassment, sexual assault. We do have suicides. We do have instances of racism and extremism. And I think we've got to communicate to parents and other influencers what we are doing to get after those issues. And we've got to be able to show that it's not just talk, you know, that we're showing results.
So we spend a lot of time thinking about this Venn diagram between the propensity to serve and the eligibility to serve. I think one of the things that the Army's doing right now that's really forward-thinking is the Future Soldier Prep Program, which is capitalizing on that part of the population who has a propensity to serve but might not meet the standards. So can you speak a little bit to what that model looks like and outcomes you might be seeing thus far?
Sure. The Future Soldier Prep course, which we're running right now at Fort Jackson, is really designed in investing in that, you know, 9% who knows that they want to serve but haven't quite gotten up to the scores that we need on the ASVAB or hasn't quite met our body fat standards. So I think of it as, you know, it's kind of a mini boot camp. There's sort of 2 pieces to it. There's an academic piece and a physical fitness piece. You know, some young Americans may be doing both, some may be doing one or the other. And it's really, you know, we've got instructors who are working with kids to help them raise their academic abilities so that they can improve their scores on the ASVAB. And it's really about trying to get kids, you know, it's essentially kids who are Cat 4 on the ASVAB and seeing if we can get them up to 3B or even 3A. Because, you know, that we have more headroom, obviously, in terms of our categories there. And frankly, we've had really good success in the early programs. We are seeing about 93% of the kids coming into the academic part of the program raising their scores and being able to go on to basic training. And then the physical fitness thing, it's again focused on, you know, helping kids with PT. And there too, we've seen pretty good success. I think we've got about 83% or 85% of the kids doing the physical fitness are you know, getting their body fat within close enough to our standards to be able to go on to basic training. So I think we're going to expand that program to other locations because, you know, we have more young Americans who want to do it than we can accommodate right now at Fort Jackson. Something I've heard a lot about as I've been talking to recruiters around the country is, you know, going back to that parents thing. There may be parents who, you know, don't want to send their kids all the way to Fort Jackson. You know, a lot of kids are a little bit more homebodies or moms and dads want to have them a little closer by. So recruiters have been saying, hey, is there some way we could maybe do this virtually? You know, particularly on the academic side, maybe there's a way to kind of do the tutoring in a virtual way. So I think that's something we have to look into. You know, I at this moment don't know, you know, couldn't tell you enough about sort of the ins and outs of that to know whether it's feasible, but I think that's something we should look at. Because I think, frankly, if we could find a way to do that kind of tutoring without having to bring the people physically to one of our installations, that might, you know, help us open the aperture. But the early results of the prep course, I think, are pretty encouraging. But again, you know, it's still the 9%, you know, and we're looking at a recruiting target this year, this coming year, we've set for ourselves of 65,000 people. That's very, very ambitious, you know, when, and I think we do need to push ourselves. We've got to rebuild our depth. You know, frankly, part of how we got here is because we've been consistently in the last few years digging pretty deep into the depth, eating our seed corn. But, you know, to get to that target, I think we're going to have to be more successful, not just with getting people, you know, who are already propensed to meet our standards, but trying to find a way to make more kids propensed.
Might also be a good opportunity to engage the Guard and the Reserve if they're distributed across the country as well.
Yeah.
So shifting gears from recruitment to retention, some of the retention challenges that we've seen lately are tied to quality of life issues. So the one that's been in the news quite a bit lately are the barracks rooms issues, and I know that that's something that you've been engaging with. So you've been touring Army installations and recently announced planned improvements. So can you give us a sense of the footprint that the Army has and the plan moving forward?
Sure. You know, one of the biggest challenges I think the Army has when it comes to housing is just the huge inventory of housing that we have and the age of that inventory. You know, most of our barracks were kind of built when there was a war. So you've got, you know, kind of Korean War barracks, Vietnam War barracks, you know, 90s barracks, and a lot of those barracks are pretty old. So the main way, you know, we have something called the Facilities Investment Plan that Army Materiel Command leads the development of that. I won't bore you with how we do that, but it's pretty systematic and comprehensive. But it's our way of trying to look across that whole inventory, active Guard and Reserve facilities, and figure out, okay, how do we prioritize them given that we have finite resources and can't, you know, invest in the entire inventory all at once. We are investing $1 billion a year in barracks. You know, that is a lot of money in barracks every year. And we are looking hard at, can we invest more than $1 billion in barracks? That is, you know, and I say we are looking hard because, of course, again, General McConville and I have to, you know, figure out the best way to allocate our resources, and quality of life and people is a really important piece, but we also have to take care of readiness. We also have to take care of modernization. But given what I have seen in terms of the barracks, and given, you know, unpleasant surprises like the Smoke Bomb Hill barracks at Fort Bragg, my view is that we need to spend more money on barracks if there is any way that we can find to do that. We are also investing in family housing. You know, we are spending money on Army family housing, and we are working really hard with our privatized housing companies to get them to invest more money in the privatized housing, which the quality of the privatized housing in a lot of cases is quite good. And I think some of the challenges that we're facing there, of course, is just the you know, external things that the Army can't control, you know, in terms of interest rates and all of those things, making it a little bit more challenging for our privatized partners to bring the capital that they had thought they were going to have a couple of years ago. But we are really focused on making sure that we've got MILCON and, you know, renovations and sustainment funding to try to get after some of these barracks issues. The last thing I would say on that is we also are doing right now a comprehensive inspection of barracks focused on mold, you know, really, and where we have teams of experts who are going out who really know how to remediate mold issues, and we are looking at 100% of Army barracks with that lens.
So you recently spoke on CBS regarding the relationship between high-quality childcare and retention. Can you speak a bit to the Army's plan on that aspect of quality of life for soldiers?
Sure. It's really important, obviously, for our soldiers to be able to focus on their jobs in the Army and not have to worry about where their kids are and are they getting quality care. I would say we're trying to. The issue with our childcare, I think, is really capacity. It's access to childcare. The quality of our child development centers is fantastic. Every single CDC that I have seen, I have walked through, I thought to myself, when my kids were little, I would have killed to have had a child care center like this. I mean, they're awesome. And the staff we have at our CDCs are also awesome. The issue is, do we have enough CDCs and do we have enough staff at the CDCs to be able to, maximize our capacity? So we've built 5 new CDCs in the last 2 years. We're going to be building a new CDC at Camp Bull-Simons for 7 Special Forces Group in FY25. We've really focused on the staffing piece because, if we've got 100% of the staff at the child care centers, then we can bring people in off the wait list. And this has been a place where we've had some challenges. Just like employers everywhere, we're all in a war for talent. We're all trying to hire, and it's hard to hire people right now. So we've been increasing salaries for our CDC staff. We've done things like say if you we'll give you 50% off. If you're a potential staffer who has kids, your first kid will give you a 50% discount kind of thing. We've had recruiting and retention bonuses to our child care staff. So those are things we're trying to do to kind of help with our staffing. One of the things that's a challenge also, though, particularly in remote locations like Fort Irwin, but even in other places, it's, we do pretty intensive screening for our CDC staff, and we do these background checks, and it takes a long time. And, whereas, they can get hired at McDonald's for $20 an hour now and get hired in the same day, but we've got, USA Jobs, and I'll just leave it there.
We've got some research on that coming out soon, too.
Excellent. Maybe you can help us.
We're working on it. So next, I'd like to shift to military spouse employment, and I will say full disclosure, I am an Army spouse myself, and I've benefited from the fact that my employer has been flexible with my time back and forth. But the Army, a lot of the structures were built on a model that required a following spouse for the entirety of a career. And now we see 2 things. One, we see that high-performing military officers and NCOs are married to high-performing people who have careers of their own. And we also see a necessity for 2 incomes in a lot of places just to pay the bills. So can you speak a bit to what initiatives are underway for military spouse employment and the role that has in retention as well?
Sure. This is another area, where I think we're doing quite a bit, but there is more to be done. And this has, I think, been a pretty hardy perennial challenge, as I understand it. I think a couple things that we're doing here. One, we've really focused on professional licensing for spouses. And I remember, I feel like, even back when I was working at CSIS many years ago and was sort of doing a lot of work on National Guard and Reserve issues, there was a lot of focus then on trying to get states to basically allow professional licenses, nursing, et cetera, occupational therapists to be more portable. I'm pleased to say that I think we have something like now agreements with 42 or 43 states to do that. So, there's a little bit more to be done there. But I think that's been something that we continue to focus on. We will reimburse spouses, I think, up to $1,000 or $1,500 for licensing costs, I think, which is also helpful. We have some what I would call fellowship programs now, where basically it's, for spouses who are interested in working, but may not know exactly what employers they can be connected to. We have a program where the Army actually pays for them for a year to kind of make those connections and do some work that is helpful in terms of building a bridge to employment outside the fence line, if you will. But again, this is an area where USA Jobs becomes an issue for us as well, because again, in many cases, spouses would like to work in some of our CDCs or in some of our MWR programs and things like that, but USA Jobs can be a challenge. So we are continuing to work on that. But I do think, frankly, and this is an area that I haven't dug into yet, but I've been thinking about it more and more, going back, Kate, to your point about this kind of very traditional model. The Army has for so long expected spouses to just do a lot of volunteer work. There's a lot of unpaid labor that spouses do that, frankly, I think the Army would find it harder to function if we didn't have that unpaid labor being done. And I think we need to look at, is that the model that we need to keep doing, or do we need to be doing some things differently? And I also think there's some little things that we need to look at that, vis-a-vis what spouses can do on post or can't do on post that probably need to be fixed. I was talking to some spouses recently who were talking about how they really don't like the word dependence, that they are viewed somehow as that kind of, takes away their agency. It's things like in some countries they're not able to buy a car if the service member is deployed, that actually they need the service member to sign paperwork. But in some cases, a service member gets deployed before the rest of the family is PCS'd, and then there's a whole issue about how do you buy a car. Or that some of the SOFAs that we have with different countries, again, don't give as many authorities, if you will, to the spouse as they do to the service member. Those are small things, but can really become, I think, big, that I think we need to kind of dig into a little more.
Yeah, we have some research looking at how the shift to remote employment globally might be playing out for military spouse employment, and SOFAs are one of the things that come up, right, as a challenge at times. So over the past couple of years, during COVID especially, there's been concerns about military family food insecurity and financial instability. The spousal employment is a piece of that, but can you speak a bit more to the issue of food insecurity in the military and what the Army and DoD is doing about that?
Sure. We're really trying to take sort of a multi-pronged approach to food insecurity. One, we're trying to make sure that Army families have, to the greatest degree possible, access to healthy food. So, for example, we have given more money to commissaries. So, right now in particular with inflation, so that the prices in our commissaries are substantially lower than what you would find off post, for example. We are looking at things like basic how BAH is calculated. And we have something that, this new thing called the Basic Needs Allowance that's going to go into effect in January for more junior enlisted are the ones really who qualify for that. But I think that will be helpful for families particularly who've been, hit by inflation. We've done a lot to try to, a lot of this is about financial management and making sure that our young families really know how to manage the money that they have in the most effective way. And so that's another thing that we're really trying to do. And then we are looking, more broadly at pay and benefits. And I think the department is going to be doing next year another one of the quadrennial military compensation reviews. But even before that, we are working with Personnel and Readiness and OSD to examine how BAH is calculated. I think there are some anchor points in BAH that at least my experts in the Army feel like no longer really reflect the reality of what, in some cases, how utilities are calculated or how the housing markets are calculated. So we want to really scrub that to make sure that we are, that BAH is at the level that it needs to be at.
Mm-hmm. So this will be the last question I pose to you before we turn to our audience. So our audience, both in person and online, if you want to think about your questions. So all of the services have struggled in the last couple of years to figure out what social media policy should look like, how they should be using social media for recruitment, how their officers enlisted across the board should be using social media. The Army recently came out with a new policy that based on the DoD instruction that came out over the summer. So can you speak a bit to the new social media policy and what that means for service members?
Sure. I mean, first of all, I want Army leaders to be, out there on social media. I mean, I think, again, when it comes to sort of reintroducing the Army to the public, I think social media is a good way to kind of shine a light to a broad audience on the different kinds of things that we're doing all around the country and all around the world. What I want to make sure we're doing is giving our leaders, whether it's NCOs or officers, kind of practical training about how to be smart on social media. And, I have looked at the guidance and the training materials that we're giving to say, battalion command teams, brigade command teams. And I think we do a pretty good job of, helping people think about do's and don'ts. And, we really emphasize thinking ahead about sort of anticipating the kinds of crises that a leadership team might experience, whether it's there's been some sort of a harmful behavior on your installation or an arrest of a service member, or maybe there's been a crisis, where your unit has been deployed. And if those kinds of things happen, first of all, our guidance really is to try to encourage command teams to think in advance about how they would respond and how they would use social media. But it's also, emphasizing, again, stay apolitical, be positive. But I think it's very practical, and that's what it is extensive. So when, for our battalion pre-command, brigade pre-command courses, there is an entire module on social media, how to use it, do's and don'ts. The one piece that I'd like to tweak a little bit more is we have quite a bit of an emphasis on what to do in terms of, looking at case studies. There isn't really an explicit what not to do, but I think we probably should have a what not to do, learn from past mistakes and things like that. Because, it's a really contested landscape out there, and it's easy to put your foot wrong. So I think that's something we've got to help our command teams with.
So I'll turn to our in-person audience first for a question. Molly? Oh, we'll have a microphone coming up.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Okay. I'm Molly McIntosh from RAND.
Good to see you.
Good to see you. Thanks for the invitation. This is wonderful. I could probably ask you 15 questions, but I will limit it to one request and one question. So the request is, thinking about the marketplace that you described early on in this conversation, personnel researchers and the portfolios that we all represent spend a lot of time thinking about how to model what influences someone's decision to join and to stay. And one thing that's become increasingly clear over the years is that it's not necessarily money, it's other aspects of the job, which is what you're getting at here. So my request is, can those preferences, as they're being revealed through that system, be captured and shared back to the research community so we can mine those data to include in our models? So that's the request, pretty please. The question is, thinking through both the Future Soldier program and the command selection programs you talked about, I'm curious to know if you're seeing, as those programs are kind of rolling out and you're seeing some of the results of it, is that shifting the demographic makeup in a way that was expected or unexpected on either who gets selected for command, oh now we're really on, who gets selected for command, and or who winds up going off to basic training? So what's the sort of DEI implication of those new programs?
Yeah, I do not know what the implications are for the Future Soldier prep course. I have not asked that question, and the prep course is still so new. We really just started it in August, but I will take that back because it's a good question. I mean, it's a good thought. And on BCAP and CCAP, I don't have hard data on this because I have asked that question because I am interested in that because, again, the Army made a decision a while ago to take pictures off of our, paperwork files. But one of the things that we also have done in the assessment programs, BCAP, CCAP, the other flavors of CAP, is one, we do, for the board members, the GOs, we do unconscious bias training before they go into the assessment. And two, as I said, the final panel interview is double blind. So there are a lot of things I think that we've put in place to try to take those, potential biases out of the equation. And so that, that prompted me a couple months ago to say, okay, what are we seeing as a result of that? And if I recall, the answer that came back to me was, that we don't really yet have good data, but anecdotally, in certain classes of CAP, for example, we have seen, just like I said, the 1 to N list that we started with and the 1 to N list that we ended with, we have seen officers of color sometimes move up the list and be selected, i.e. they would not have been, women and people of color who otherwise would not have been selected for command. But I want more data on that. And I think, the other thing that we need to think harder about is how are, now that, as I said, we have lieutenant colonels who went through BCAP, who are in command and who are commanding now, what are the metrics that we need to have so that we can see how their performance, how do we measure their performance relative to their peers who were battalion commanders 5 years ago who didn't go through the process? That's something I think we need to, we need more data on.
I'll go to a question from online. So as you're recruiting more individuals and you're looking for more skill sets that come from the private sector, how are you recognizing that enhanced experience that might be coming in to the service from those who have private sector experience? I know there's been some changes, so lateral entry, right, certainly allows the services to give a little more credit on the officer side. Is there something underway for the enlisted side?
Yeah, we are looking at that now. One of the things that we're doing to try to help us with recruiting is we've stood up an Army recruiting task force that's led by a 2-star Army reservist named Deb Katulik, who actually comes out of the private sector, as so many reservists do. We have these design teams that are looking at a variety of different issues, and we've got actually an executive from Walmart who is one of those, is a part of one of those. And one of the things that we're looking at is how can we capture that kind of private sector experience and maybe bring people in at a higher level, start as an E3, rather than an E1, for example. So that's a new initiative that we're working on, that we're sort of exploring and seeing if we can design something, but we haven't put it in place yet.
Dr. Chu?
David Chu, IDA.
Yeah, good to see you.
Thank you for sharing your views with us. Perhaps I can morph Molly's request into a question. And that is for the portfolio of interesting, promising programs you've sketched this morning, what the Army's evaluation plans or evaluation strategy might be. I raise it because in the early years of the volunteer force, the Army actually ran controlled experiments, which are the foundation of our enlistment standards down to the present day. But the enthusiasm for that has fallen off, of course, over the years. They're not cheap. They're not easy to organize. I acknowledge that. But the obvious issue is which programs are effective, and even more important, which programs are effective relative to their costs, so that over time, as resources constrain what you can do, you can vector the Army's efforts in the most productive directions.
Dr. Chu, are you talking about, are we specific sort of new programs that we've put in place, or just sort of generally across the personnel
Particularly
space?
the new programs, because these are different, like Molly's or your response on DEI, the online question. Do we understand? The department has, I think, a tendency, in my experience, to launch things because they sound good, intuitively they are helpful, but it doesn't really know which ones are helpful, especially relative to their costs.
Yeah, throw spaghetti at a wall, see what sticks.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's been my experience a lot of times too. I would say on the Future Soldier Prep course, it's luckily, our ability to measure whether that program is effective is fairly straightforward, because we basically have a set of existing performance standards that our applicants have to meet, and we're looking at is the tutoring and the sort of individual physical fitness partnering that we're doing, is it actually allowing those applicants to rise up to the standards in a period of time? And we're seeing yes, and it's been a relatively low cost program, but to your point, I think that's one of the issues when we look at potentially trying to do it in a virtual way. There is a cost price point. I mean, the instructors are not free and things like that. So I do think that we have to factor that in. And that's something, I have been pressing on. I feel like some things are easier to measure than others. We have We're definitely going to be investing more marketing in our recruiting efforts, for example. The Army Marketing Office actually does have pretty good data to help us understand from a results perspective where to spend that next incremental dollar. But there are other things that, frankly, I don't know if we have good ways to measure. So another initiative that we're doing in the recruiting space is we've basically taken, we've tasked Forces Command to essentially partner our divisions here in the United States with our recruiting brigades to kind of give them more resources to allow Americans to see more of the Army. And so we've got these 15 cities that we're targeting, and we are spending some money in the single millions of dollars per city to get Army units and stuff out there to be visible at events. But how are we going to trace that back to, did it actually result in signed contracts? I don't think that we do know, but I don't know exactly how to measure that. So I think what I would say is, me and General McConville and our PA&E and our G8 are pressing TRADOC, in those areas where it feels like you can measure. We are certainly trying to do that because I want to be a good steward of our taxpayer dollars. But there are some initiatives that we've undertaken that I think are just inherently hard to measure. But frankly, given the intensity of the recruiting challenge that we're facing, I think we do have to kind of move out.
I would disagree. If I may follow very briefly, I think I would urge that you look not only at the short run, but the long run consequences. So take the Future Soldier Program. One issue I think is going to be, and not to be pessimistic about this, are they just doing better on the test? Or are they doing well in their Army careers? What are the career outcomes from the graduates of this program versus those you would recruit in some other way?
Yeah, that's a great point. And I will say, what we are seeing, and again, it's very early days, is the graduates of the Future Soldier Prep Course who are going into basic are basically getting into, leadership positions, if you will, in basic training in larger numbers than kids who didn't come through the program. So it does feel like Future Soldier Prep Course is kind of giving them a little bit of a head start and kind of building in a little bit more resiliency than the kids who are just kind of coming straight into basic.
I think we have time for one more question, so Dr. Lee.
Good morning, Carrie Lee from the U.S. Army War College. I was really struck when you said that the burden of proof is really on us in the Army to show that we're a good place to work and that we're a good service to come work for. It leads to a broader question that I have about kind of what are the Army's initiatives that we're putting forward in order to kind of bridge that civil-military gap?
Can you elaborate a little bit on what you mean?
So part of the burden of proof to show that we're a good place involves a lot more interaction, right, between the Army and the military and society. And so I was wondering if there are particular programs and what the Army is doing to try and bridge that divide to get out into communities and to be much more a part of American society.
Yeah. I think one thing we're doing is this 15 cities focus area, and because again, as I've said a few times, I think we do need to reintroduce ourselves to America. You undoubtedly are very familiar with only 1% of Americans serve, and one of the things we see through the JAMR survey results is that most young Americans really don't have any contact with the military and are not familiar with what the military is or what Army life is like. So part of what we're trying to do by partnering with Forces Command and kind of getting outside the gates is to try to build a little bit more of that connective tissue. And we're also trying to invite people in communities around major Army installations to come into those installations a little bit more than we have been doing, frankly. I think, after the 9/11 attacks, obviously, we became much more of sort of a Fortress America, and it was harder, I think, for people to come and see us. And then I think, we just weren't thinking about it so much. It's not that we don't want to bring people into our bases, but we just were doing other things. And I think now we realize we need to do that more. But I think we also, and General McConville has been very, very, very strong on this, we have challenged all of our general officers and Army senior leaders to get out there and be in public. And, when they Go back to their hometowns, go out and talk. You know, we fanned out all over the country for Veterans Day and had our 1, 2, 3, 4-star generals speaking in communities, American Legions and things like that. And I think we just, you know, we need to continue to do that in a methodical way. But if you have good ideas, I'm very open to them.
Well, we want to be respectful of your time. We're incredibly grateful that you were open to having this discussion. We look forward to what the Army has going forward. So thank you, everyone, for your participation today.
Thanks.